The wind howled like a wounded animal across the frozen plains of Montana Territory, and Katelyn Jensen knew she was going to die out here if she did not find shelter soon. Her mare, a sturdy dun-colored Mustang named Bess, stumbled through the knee-deep snow, breath coming in labored clouds that crystallized instantly in the bitter December air of 1883. Katelyn's fingers had gone numb inside her wool gloves an hour ago, maybe longer, and she could no longer feel her toes in her boots. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, transforming what should have been a simple 2-day journey from her father's ranch outside of Dillon, Montana, to the neighboring Whitmore spread into a death sentence. She had been foolish to think she could outrun the storm. The sky had been clear when she left that morning, the kind of brilliant blue that made the snow-capped peaks of the Beaverhead Mountains look close enough to touch. But winter in Montana Territory was unpredictable and merciless, and now she was paying the price for her arrogance. Her father had warned her to wait another day, to let him send one of the ranch hands with her, but Katelyn had insisted she could make the trip alone. At 22 years old, she prided herself on her independence, her ability to handle a horse and a rifle as well as any man. Now that pride seemed like the foolishness of a child. Bess whinnied, a sound of distress that cut through the wind, and Katelyn felt the mare's legs buckle beneath her. They went down together, Katelyn managing to kick free of the stirrups just before Bess collapsed onto her side in the snow. Katelyn landed hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs, and for a moment she could do nothing but lie there, gasping, as the snow fell thick and fast around them both. "Come on, girl," Katelyn whispered, her voice cracking. She crawled through the snow to where Bess lay, running her hands along the mare's trembling flanks. The horse was exhausted, pushed beyond her limits, and Katelyn felt tears freeze on her cheeks as she realized they could go no further. This was where they would die together, buried beneath the endless Montana snow. She curled against Bess's warm body, seeking what little heat remained, and closed her eyes. The cold was not so bad now. In fact, she almost felt warm, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a terrible sign. Sleep beckoned, sweet and inviting, and Katelyn let herself drift toward it. She never heard the hoofbeats approaching through the storm, never saw the dark shape of horse and rider materialize out of the swirling white. She was already unconscious when strong arms lifted her from the snow, already beyond hearing when a deep voice spoke close to her ear. "You're going to be okay." Warmth. That was the first thing Katelyn became aware of as consciousness returned. Warmth and the crackle of a fire and the smell of wood smoke and coffee. She tried to open her eyes, but her eyelids felt weighted, and it took 3 attempts before she managed to force them apart. The world swam into focus slowly, revealing rough-hewn log walls, a low ceiling with exposed beams, and a stone fireplace where flames danced and flickered. "Easy now." The voice came from somewhere to her left, and Katelyn turned her head, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. A man sat in a wooden chair beside the narrow bed where she lay, his arms crossed over his chest, watching her with eyes the color of storm clouds. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a few days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. There was something solid and reassuring about him, from his broad shoulders to the calm, steady way he regarded her. "Where am I?" Katelyn's voice came out as a rasp, and she coughed, which sent a wave of pain through her chest. "My cabin, about 3 miles northeast of Dillon." He leaned forward, reaching for something on a small table beside the bed. "Here, drink this." He held a tin cup to her lips, supporting her head with his other hand, and Katelyn sipped gratefully at the water. It was cool and sweet, and she drank until the cup was empty. "My horse," she said suddenly, memory flooding back. Bess, is she in my barn? She's going to be fine. Tired and half frozen, but I got her warm and fed. She'll pull through. He set the cup aside and settled back in his chair. You're lucky I was out checking my trap lines when the storm hit, or I never would have found you. Katelyn closed her eyes, relief washing over her. Thank you. I thought we were both going to die out there. You came close. Another hour and you would have frozen solid. His tone was matter of fact, not cruel, but the words still sent a chill down her spine. What were you doing out in that storm anyway? Anyone with sense stays inside when the weather turns like that. I was riding from my father's ranch to the Whitmore place when the blizzard hit. I thought I could make it through. Katelyn opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. I was wrong. You were stupid. He said it without heat, just a simple statement of fact. This is Montana territory in December. The weather can turn on a dime and it doesn't care how tough you think you are. Katelyn bristled despite her exhaustion. I know that now, don't I? I don't need a lecture from a stranger. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. Fair enough. Name's Yates Zimmerman. This is my land, my cabin, and you're welcome, by the way. The rebuke stung because it was deserved. Katelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm sorry. That was ungracious of me. Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Zimmerman. Truly. I'm Katelyn Jensen. My father owns the Double J Ranch west of Dillon. Jensen. I know the name. Your father's got a reputation as a fair man and a good rancher. Yates stood, unfolding to his full height, which Katelyn guessed was over 6 feet. He wore denim pants and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing muscled forearms. You should rest. You've been unconscious for about 6 hours and your body needs time to recover. 6 hours. Katelyn tried to sit up, but Yates put a hand on her shoulder, gently but firmly pushing her back down. Don't try to get up yet. You've got some frostbite on your fingers and toes. Nothing too serious, but it's going to hurt like hell when the feeling comes back completely. Just lie still and let yourself heal. Katelyn wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow, and she found herself sinking back into the thin pillow. The Whitmore Ranch. I was supposed to be there today. They'll worry. Can't do anything about that until the storm passes. We're snowed in here for at least another day, maybe 2. Yates moved to the fireplace, adding another log to the flames. I'll ride out to both ranches once it's safe and let them know you're alive. Until then, you're stuck with me. The thought should have alarmed her. She was alone in a remote cabin with a man she had never met, miles from help, with a blizzard raging outside. But something about Yates Zimmerman made her feel safe rather than afraid. Maybe it was the calm, capable way he moved, or the directness of his gaze, or simply the fact that he had saved her life when he could have easily ridden past in the storm and never known she was there. I'm grateful, she said softly, for everything. Yates glanced back at her, and this time there was definite warmth in his eyes. Get some sleep, Katelyn Jensen. We'll worry about the rest when you're stronger. She wanted to stay awake, to talk more, to learn about this man who had appeared out of the storm like some kind of guardian angel, but her body had other ideas. Within minutes, she drifted back into sleep, lulled by the warmth of the fire and the sense that, for now at least, she was safe. When Katelyn woke again, pale winter sunlight was filtering through the cabin's single window, and the howling of the wind had diminished to a low moan. She felt more clear-headed now, though her fingers and toes throbbed with a deep, burning ache that made her gasp when she tried to flex them. That's the frostbite. Yates's voice came from across the room, and Katelyn turned to see him standing at a small iron stove, stirring something in a pot. It's going to hurt for a few days, but you should heal up fine. You didn't lose anything to the cold. Small mercies, Katelyn muttered, gritting her teeth against the pain. She looked down at herself and realized she was wearing an oversized flannel nightshirt that definitely was not hers. Heat flooded her face. Your clothes were soaked through. I had to get you out of them or you would have died of exposure. Yates spoke without turning around, his tone neutral. I promise I was a gentleman about it. Your things are drying by the fire. Katelyn did not know what to say to that. In her world, a man undressing a woman who was not his wife was scandalous, grounds for a forced marriage or worse. But Yates was right, he had done what was necessary to save her life, and she could hardly fault him for that. Still, the knowledge that he had seen her in such a vulnerable state made her feel strange and exposed. "Thank you," she said finally, "for being respectful. I'm not a savage." Now Yates did turn, leveling that steady gray gaze at her. "You needed help and I helped you. That's all there is to it." He carried a bowl over to the bed, and Katelyn saw that it was filled with a thick stew that smelled of venison and root vegetables. Her stomach growled loudly, and Yates's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Glad to see you've got an appetite." "That's a good sign." He handed her the bowl and a spoon. "Eat slowly. Your body's been through a lot." Katelyn ate, savoring each bite. The stew was simple but good, well seasoned and hearty, exactly what she needed. Between mouthfuls, she studied Yates as he moved around the cabin, which was small but well organized. There was a sense of order to everything, from the neat stack of firewood by the hearth to the rifles hanging on pegs near the door. This was the home of a man who lived alone and liked it that way. "Have you been out here long?" she asked. 3 years. I staked my claim after mustering out of the cavalry." Yates poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove and leaned against the wall, watching her eat. "I wanted land of my own, somewhere quiet. Montana Territory seemed like the right place." "Where are you from originally?" "Kansas. My family had a farm there, but it got burned out during the war. After that, there was nothing left to go back to." His expression was distant, haunted by memories he did not seem inclined to share. "I joined up with the cavalry when I was 18, served for 6 years, then came here to start over." Katelyn did the math quickly. That would make him 27, 5 years older than her. Old enough to have seen things she could only imagine, young enough that his whole life was still ahead of him. She found herself curious about him in a way that surprised her. "You ever get lonely out here by yourself?" Yates shrugged. "Sometimes. But I've got my horses, my trap lines, the land. It's enough." He took a sip of his coffee. "What about you? What were you doing riding to the Whitmore place in December, delivering a message from my father?" "The Whitmores are our neighbors, and there's been talk of combining our herds for the winter grazing. Pa wanted me to discuss the details with Mr. Whitmore." Katelyn scraped the last of the stew from her bowl. "It seemed like a simple enough errand. I've made the ride dozens of times. But never in winter. Never in a blizzard." "No," she admitted. "That was a first, and if I have anything to say about it, a last." This time Yates definitely smiled, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his face from merely handsome to something more. Katelyn felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with her recent brush with death. "Smart woman," he said. They spent the rest of the day in companionable conversation, trading stories about life in Montana Territory, about ranching and trapping, and the challenges of making a living in such an unforgiving landscape. Katelyn learned that Yates was an excellent trapper, that he sold pelts in Dillon twice a month, and that he was slowly building up a herd of cattle with the money he made. He had dreams of expanding his operation, of maybe hiring help once he could afford it, of turning his modest claim into a real ranch. "It's hard work, doing it alone," he admitted as evening fell and he lit an oil lamp to push back the darkness. But I like knowing that everything I've built is mine. No one can take it from me." "I understand that," Katelyn said. "I feel the same way about the Double J, even though it's my father's ranch. I've worked that land since I was old enough to sit a horse. It's in my blood." "Will it be yours someday? Or do you have brothers who'll inherit?" "I'm an only child. My mother died when I was 12 and Pa never remarried, so yes, the ranch will be mine eventually." She said it with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The thought of her father gone, of carrying on without him, was almost unbearable. "But I hope that day is a long way off." "I'm sure it is." Yates began preparing dinner, which turned out to be fried salt pork and beans with corn bread. It was simple fare, but after the day she had had, it tasted like a feast to Katelyn. As they ate, the storm picked up again outside, wind battering the cabin walls and snow hissing against the window. Katelyn was profoundly grateful to be inside, warm and fed and alive. She stole glances at Yates across the small table, studying the strong lines of his face in the lamplight, the way his hands moved with easy confidence as he ate. There was something about him that drew her, something beyond the simple gratitude of a rescued person toward their rescuer. "You keep staring at me," Yates said suddenly, not looking up from his plate. Katelyn felt her face go hot. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. I was just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "About how strange it is that 2 days ago I didn't know you existed, and now you're the reason I'm alive. It makes you think about fate, about how random life can be." Yates did look up then, his gray eyes serious. "I don't believe in fate. I believe in choices. You chose to ride out in uncertain weather. I chose to check my trap lines despite the storm. Those choices led to us being in the same place at the same time. That's not fate. That's just life." "Maybe," Katelyn said. "Or maybe fate is just another word for the sum of all our choices." He considered that, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Katelyn could not shake the feeling that something significant had just passed between them, some acknowledgement of a connection that went beyond circumstance. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was reading too much into the situation, because of her heightened emotions after nearly dying. But the feeling persisted, warm and insistent, settling somewhere in the region of her heart. That night, Yates insisted she take the bed again while he made himself a pallet on the floor near the fire. Katelyn protested, saying she should be the one sleeping on the floor since he had already given up his bed the previous night, but Yates waved off her objections. "You're still recovering. You need the bed more than I do." His tone brooked no argument. "Besides, I've slept in worse places. This is practically luxury compared to some of the camps I made during my cavalry days." Katelyn lay in the narrow bed, listening to the storm and the quiet sounds of Yates settling in for the night. She had never shared sleeping quarters with a man who was not family, and the intimacy of it made her hyper-aware of every sound, every breath. She could hear him moving, the rustle of blankets, the soft sigh as he found a comfortable position. It should have felt awkward or wrong, but instead it felt strangely natural, as if this was where she was meant to be. "Yates," she said into the darkness. "Yeah, thank you for everything. I know I already said it, but I need you to know I mean it." There was a pause, then his voice came back, softer than before. "You're welcome, Katelyn. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll see if the weather's clear enough for me to check on Bess and maybe get word to your father." Katelyn closed her eyes, a smile playing at her lips. She fell asleep with the sound of Yates's steady breathing mixing with the wind, feeling safer than she had any right to feel. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Yates was up with the first light, stoking the fire and making coffee while Katelyn slowly sat up in bed, wincing at the continued ache in her fingers and toes. The pain was less than the day before, but it still hurt to move them. "How are you feeling?" Yates asked, bringing her a cup of coffee. "Sore, but better." Katelyn accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around it for warmth. "Is the storm over?" "Looks like it. We got about 2 feet of new snow, but the sky's clear now." He moved to the window, looking out at the transformed landscape. "I'm going to go out and check on the horses, make sure the barn weathered the storm all right. You stay inside and keep warm." Katelyn wanted to argue that she was perfectly capable of helping, but she knew he was right. She was still weak, still recovering, and venturing out into the deep snow would only set back her healing. So she nodded and watched as Yates bundled up in a heavy coat and gloves, then stepped out into the bright, frozen world beyond the cabin. While he was gone, Katelyn took stock of her situation. Her clothes were dry now, hanging on a line near the fireplace, and she gingerly got out of bed to retrieve them. Her movements were slow and careful, each step sending jolts of pain through her frost-damaged feet, but she managed to dress herself without falling. The simple act of putting on her own clothes made her feel more like herself, less vulnerable and dependent. She was braiding her long chestnut hair when Yates returned, stamping snow off his boots at the door. He looked pleased. "Bess is doing well. She's got her appetite back and seems steady on her legs. I think in another day or two she'll be strong enough to make the ride to your father's ranch." He shrugged out of his coat and hung it on a peg. "Same goes for you. You're healing faster than I expected." "Jensen's stubbornness," Katelyn said with a slight smile. "We're hard to kill, I noticed." Yates poured himself more coffee and joined her at the table. "I'm thinking I should ride into Dillon today. Let your father know you're safe and also get word to the Whitmores. The town's only about 3 miles south, and the main trail should be passable now that the storm's cleared." The thought of him leaving, even for a few hours, sent an unexpected pang through Katelyn's chest. She told herself it was just because she was still feeling vulnerable, but she knew it was more than that. In the day and a half since he had saved her, she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the solid, reassuring reality of him. The cabin would feel empty without him in it. "That makes sense," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "Pa will be worried sick. The sooner he knows I'm alive, the better. I'll head out within the hour. There's food in the cupboard, and the fire should stay lit as long as you add a log every couple of hours. You'll be fine on your own for a while." Yates studied her face. "Unless you'd rather I wait until tomorrow and we ride in together." Katelyn wanted to say yes, wanted to keep him there with her, but that was selfish. Her father needed to know she was safe, and every hour of delay was another hour he would spend imagining the worst. "No, you should go today. I'll be fine here." She managed a smile. "I promise not to burn down your cabin while you're gone." Yates left shortly after, riding his sturdy bay gelding south toward Dillon. Katelyn watched from the window until he disappeared into the white landscape, then turned back to the quiet cabin. The silence felt oppressive without him there, and she found herself at loose ends. She was not used to inactivity, to having nothing to do but sit and wait. At home on the Double J, there was always work to be done, always something that needed her attention. To occupy herself, she tidied the cabin, washing the breakfast dishes and sweeping the plank floor. She reorganized the cupboard, which was surprisingly well stocked for a bachelor, and mended a tear she found in one of Yates's shirts. It felt domestic and intimate, caring for his things in his space, and she tried not to think too hard about what that might mean. The hours crawled by. Katelyn added logs to the fire, drank more coffee than was probably wise, and found herself repeatedly drawn to the window to search the southern horizon for a returning rider. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that Yates had been gone only a few hours and the round trip to Dillon would take most of the day. But knowing that did not stop her from watching. It was late afternoon, the sun already beginning its descent toward the mountains, when she finally spotted movement in the distance. Her heart leapt, and she pressed her face to the cold glass, watching as horse and rider resolved out of the whiteness. But as they drew closer, Katelyn realized with a sinking feeling that it was not just Yates returning. There were two horses, two riders, and even at this distance she recognized the powerful black gelding and the set of the man's shoulders. Her father had come. Katelyn opened the door as they approached, cold air rushing in to steal the warmth from the cabin. Yates dismounted first, then her father, Thomas Jensen, swung down from his black horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He was in his early 50s, his hair more gray than brown now, his face weathered by decades under the Montana sun. But his eyes, the same green as Katelyn's, were sharp and clear as he strode toward the cabin. "Katie, girl," he said, and the relief in his voice nearly broke her. He pulled her into a crushing embrace, and Katelyn hugged him back, breathing in the familiar scents of leather and tobacco and horse that always clung to him. Thank God. When Mr. Zimmerman rode into town and told me what happened, I nearly lost my mind thinking about what could have been. "I'm all right, Pa, I'm fine." Katelyn pulled back, blinking away tears. "Yates found me in time. He saved my life." Thomas looked over his shoulder at Yates, who stood quietly by the horses, giving them space. "So I understand. Mr. Zimmerman, I owe you a debt I can never repay." "If you hadn't been out checking your trap lines when the storm hit," he stopped, his voice breaking. "Well, I don't want to think about it." "No debt," Yates said simply. "I did what anyone would have done." "Not anyone. Not everyone would have braved that storm, would have taken in a stranger and cared for her so well." Thomas released Katelyn and walked over to Yates, extending his hand. "You're a good man, Yates Zimmerman. I'd be honored if you'd consider yourself a friend to the Jensen family." Yates shook his hand, and Katelyn saw something pass between the two men, some wordless communication of respect and understanding. "I'd like that, Mr. Jensen. Call me Thomas. And I mean what I said. If you ever need anything at all, you come to the Double J. We take care of our friends." They talked for a while longer, Thomas asking questions about exactly what had happened, Yates answering in his calm, understated way. Katelyn watched them, these two men who were now the most important people in her life, and felt something settle into place in her chest. This was right. This was how it was supposed to be. Eventually, Thomas said, "We should head back before it gets full dark." "Katie, are you strong enough to ride, or should we wait until morning?" "I can ride," Katelyn said, though in truth she was not entirely sure. Her body still ached, and the thought of spending hours in the saddle made her wince internally. But she wanted to go home, wanted to sleep in her own bed and put this whole ordeal behind her. Yates must have seen something in her face because he said, "Maybe it would be better to wait until morning, start out fresh." Katelyn, still recovering from frostbite and pushing too hard, could cause a setback. Thomas frowned, considering, then nodded. "You're right. We'll stay the night here if that's all right with you, Yates. Head out at first light tomorrow." "Of course. I'll see to the horses." Yates headed toward the barn, and Katelyn watched him go, feeling a complicated mix of relief that he would be there for one more night and sadness that this interlude, this strange, intimate time just the two of them, was coming to an end. That evening, the cabin felt crowded with 3 people in it, though not unpleasantly so. Thomas insisted on taking the floor, saying Katelyn should have the bed and Yates should sleep in his own home. They ate dinner together, venison steaks and fried potatoes, and Thomas regaled them with stories from the ranch. news from town, anything to fill the silence and distract from the fact that his daughter had nearly died alone in the snow. Katelyn caught Yates's eye across the table more than once, and each time she felt that same strange flutter in her chest. Tomorrow she would go home. Tomorrow this would be over. The thought made her inexplicably sad. Later, as she lay in Yates's bed for the last time, listening to the quiet sounds of the two men settling in for the night, Katelyn stared at the dark ceiling and tried to understand what she was feeling. She had known Yates Zimmerman for barely 2 days. She should not feel this connected to him, this reluctant to leave, but she did, and denying it seemed pointless. "Good night, Katie girl," her father said softly from his spot near the door. "Good night, Pa." There was a pause, then Yates's voice, low and warm. "Good night, Katelyn." "Good night, Yates." She fell asleep with his name on her lips, and the knowledge that, no matter what happened next, her life had been irrevocably changed by a blizzard, and a man who had appeared out of the storm to save her. The ride back to the Double J the next morning was long and cold, but uneventful. Yates rode with them, saying he wanted to make sure Katelyn made it home safely, and she was grateful for his presence even though it meant prolonging the inevitable goodbye. Bess performed admirably, showing no lasting effects from her ordeal, and by mid-afternoon they were riding through the gates of the Double J Ranch. The ranch was everything Yates's modest operation was not: sprawling, prosperous, well-established. The main house was a large, 2-story structure of white painted wood with a wrap-around porch. There were multiple barns, corrals full of cattle and horses, bunkhouses for the hired hands. It was impressive, the product of decades of hard work and careful management. Several ranch hands came out to greet them, and Katelyn saw the relief on their faces when they recognized her. News of her disappearance in the storm had clearly spread, and they had feared the worst. Thomas quickly explained what had happened, introducing Yates as the man who had saved his daughter's life, and Katelyn watched as respect and gratitude transformed the cowboy's expressions. "You'll stay for supper," Thomas said to Yates as they dismounted. It was not quite a question. "It's the least we can do." Yates looked like he might refuse, but Katelyn caught his eye and gave a small nod. She was not ready for him to leave yet. She needed more time. "All right," Yates agreed. "Thank you." Supper was a boisterous affair, with the ranch hands joining them in the large dining room. The housekeeper, a motherly woman named Mrs. Chen who had been with the Jensen family for years, fussed over Katelyn and insisted on examining her frostbitten fingers and toes. She pronounced that Yates had done an excellent job caring for her, which made him shift uncomfortably in his chair, clearly not used to being the center of attention. After the meal, Thomas pulled Yates aside for a private conversation in his study, leaving Katelyn to wait anxiously in the parlor. She could hear the low murmur of male voices, but could not make out the words. When they finally emerged 20 minutes later, both men looked satisfied. "Yates has agreed to join us for Christmas dinner next week," Thomas announced. "I won't take no for an answer, so don't even try, young man." Yates glanced at Katelyn, and she felt her heart lift at the thought of seeing him again so soon. "I'd be honored," he said. He left shortly after, riding back toward his cabin in the gathering dusk. Katelyn watched from the porch until he disappeared, then turned to find her father studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "He's a good man," Thomas said quietly. "Yes, he is. You like him." It was not a question, and Katelyn saw no point in denying it. "Yes, Pa, I do." Thomas nodded slowly, his weathered face thoughtful. "He's not wealthy, Katie. His operation is small, and it'll be years before he builds it into anything substantial. Some might say you could do better, with your looks and your inheritance." "I'm not interested in what some might say." Katelyn met her father's eyes squarely. "And I'm not interested in men who want me for my inheritance." A smile tugged at Thomas's lips. "No, I didn't think you would be. You've got your mother's spirit, Katie girl. She never gave a damn about what was proper or expected either. It's one of the things I loved most about her." He put an arm around Katelyn's shoulders, and they stood together on the porch, looking out at the darkening landscape. In the distance, the Beaverhead Mountains were purple silhouettes against the twilight sky. "If Yates Zimmerman is the man you want, then I'll support that decision," Thomas said. "But make sure it's what you really want, Katie. Not just gratitude because he saved your life, but something real and lasting." "I know the difference, Pa." Katelyn leaned her head against her father's shoulder. "And I think this might be real." The week leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. Katelyn threw herself into the preparations, helping Mrs. Chen with the cooking and baking, decorating the house with pine boughs and holly, trying to keep her mind off the fact that she would see Yates again soon. She told herself she was being foolish, acting like a schoolgirl with her first crush, but that did not stop her pulse from quickening every time she thought about him. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. The world blanketed in white, the kind of perfect winter day that made Montana Territory look like something out of a storybook. Katelyn dressed with care in her best gown, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and took extra time with her hair, pinning it up in an elaborate style that Mrs. Chen assured her looked lovely. Yates arrived in the early afternoon, riding up to the house on his bay gelding with a burlap sack tied to his saddle. He had cleaned up, Katelyn noticed, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved, wearing what were clearly his best clothes. The sight of him made her mouth go dry. "Merry Christmas," she said, meeting him at the door. "Merry Christmas, Katelyn." He handed her the burlap sack with an almost shy smile. "I brought something for the dinner, fresh venison from a deer I took down yesterday." "That's wonderful. Mrs. Chen will be thrilled." Katelyn clutched the sack, suddenly tongue-tied. They had not seen each other in a week, and the easy familiarity of the cabin felt distant now, replaced by something more formal and uncertain. Thomas appeared behind her, breaking the awkward moment. "Yates, good to see you. Come in, come in." "It's too cold to stand in the doorway." The afternoon passed pleasantly. Yates fit in well with the small group, which consisted of Katelyn, Thomas, Mrs. Chen, and the ranch foreman, a grizzled cowboy named Ben who had been with the Double J for 30 years. They ate a feast of roasted venison, potatoes, vegetables, and pie, and afterward gathered in the parlor where Thomas produced a bottle of good whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. As the evening wore on and the conversation flowed, Katelyn found herself sitting beside Yates on the sofa, acutely aware of his proximity. Once, their hands brushed as they both reached for their glasses, and the contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Would you like to see the barn?" she asked impulsively. "We have a new foal that was born last week. She's beautiful." Yates glanced at Thomas, who made a shooing gesture. "Go on, you two. Show him around, Katie." They bundled into their coats and headed out into the cold night. The sky was clear, stars brilliant overhead, and their breath came in silver clouds. Katelyn led Yates to the largest barn, where the new foal stood on wobbly legs beside her mother. "She's a beauty," Yates said, reaching over the stall door to stroke the foal's soft nose. "Good bloodlines." "The best. We're hoping she'll be a champion-cutting horse when she's grown." Katelyn leaned on the stall door beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Pa's very particular about his breeding program." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the horses. Then Yates said quietly, "I've missed you this week." Katelyn's heart stuttered. "I've missed you too." He turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the barn she could just make out his expression, serious and intent. "Katelyn, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about it all week, trying to figure out the right way to say it, but there is no right way. So I'm just going to be direct. All right. When I found you in that storm, when I carried you back to my cabin and spent those days taking care of you, something changed for me. I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. But I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop wondering what it would be like if he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I'm not a rich man, Katelyn. My operation is small, and I don't have much to offer except hard work and honest intentions. But if you'd be willing to give me a chance, I'd like to court you properly. With your father's permission, of course." Joy bloomed in Katelyn's chest, so sudden and intense it almost hurt. "You already have his permission." Yates blinked. "I do. He told me last week that if you were the man I wanted, he'd support it. So yes, you have his permission." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "And you have mine. I'd like that very much, Yates. I'd like to see where this goes." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, transforming him. "Yeah, yeah." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a gentleness that made her shiver. "I promise I'll do right by you, Katelyn. I'll work hard, build something we can be proud of. Yates." She reached up with her free hand, touching his face. "I don't care about any of that. I just care about you." He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek, and for a long moment they stood there in the quiet barn, surrounded by the warm smell of hay and horses, with something new and fragile and precious growing between them. "We should get back inside before your father sends out a search party," Yates said eventually, though he made no move to release her, probably. But Katelyn did not move either. She was exactly where she wanted to be. When they finally returned to the house, hand in hand, Thomas took one look at their faces and nodded in satisfaction. "Well," he said, "it's about time." The winter months passed, and Yates became a regular presence at the Double J. He came for dinner twice a week, and on Sundays he and Katelyn would go for long rides across the snow-covered range, wrapped in heavy coats and blankets, talking about everything and nothing. They discussed their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Yates told her about his time in the cavalry, about the things he had seen and done that still haunted him sometimes in the dark hours before dawn. Katelyn talked about her mother, about the aching void her death had left, about her determination to make her proud by managing the ranch well. They kissed for the first time in February, standing beside a frozen creek with the winter sun slanting through the bare trees. It was tentative at first, almost careful, but then Yates pulled her closer and deepened the kiss, and Katelyn felt something ignite inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words coming out rough and fervent. "I know it's too soon, I know I should wait, but I can't keep it in anymore. I love you, Katelyn Jensen. I love you too." The words felt right, inevitable, as if she had been waiting her whole life to say them to this man. "I think I have since the moment you pulled me out of the snow and told me I was going to be okay." They courted all through the spring, and by the time summer arrived, everyone in Dillon knew that Yates Zimmerman and Katelyn Jensen were a matched pair. There was some gossip, of course, some speculation that Katelyn could have done better, but most folks thought it was a good match. Yates had a reputation as a hard worker and an honest man, and Thomas Jensen's obvious approval went a long way toward silencing any critics. In July, Yates came to the Double J with a purpose. He asked to speak with Thomas privately, and the two men closeted themselves in the study for over an hour. When they emerged, Thomas was grinning and Yates looked nervous but happy. "Katie, girl, come here," Thomas called. Katelyn set down the mending she had been working on and joined them, her heart pounding. She had a feeling she knew what this was about. "Yates has something he wants to ask you," Thomas said, then tactfully retreated, leaving them alone in the parlor. Yates took both of Katelyn's hands in his, and she saw that his were shaking slightly. "I don't have a fancy ring yet, but I'll get you one as soon as I can. And I know my cabin is small and not what you're used to, but I'm working on building an addition, and in a few years I should be able to afford a proper house. What I'm trying to say is," he stopped, took a breath, and looked directly into her eyes. "Katelyn Jensen, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on me and my little operation and let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy?" "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper, choked with emotion. "Yes, Yates, of course I'll marry you." He whooped, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, and Katelyn laughed through her tears. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and she kissed him back with all the love and joy and certainty in her heart. They were married in September, just before the first snow, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Dillon. Katelyn wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years, and Yates wore a new suit that Thomas had insisted on buying for him. The whole town turned out for the wedding, along with all the hands from the Double J and several of Yates's trapping friends. It was a joyous occasion, full of music and dancing and celebration. When it was time to leave for their new home, Katelyn hugged her father tightly. "Thank you, Pa, for everything. Be happy, Katie girl, that's all I want for you." Thomas held her at arm's length, his eyes suspiciously bright. "And you know you always have a home here if you need it." "I know." She kissed his cheek, then turned to where Yates waited with their horses. He helped her mount Bess, then swung up onto his bay, and together they rode away from the Double J toward Yates's cabin, which was now their cabin, their home. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. The cabin was indeed small, and Katelyn had to learn to manage a household without the help of Mrs. Chen or the conveniences of the Double J. But she threw herself into it with the same determination she brought to everything, learning to cook on the wood stove, to make do with limited supplies, to find beauty and comfort in their simple life. Yates was a considerate husband, always asking her opinion, always making sure she was comfortable and happy. He worked long hours improving their land, building the addition he had promised, slowly expanding his cattle operation. Katelyn worked beside him whenever she could, riding the boundaries of their claim, helping with the branding and the doctoring of sick animals. They were partners in every sense of the word. By the time winter came again, the addition was complete, giving them a proper bedroom and a larger living space. Katelyn had made curtains for the windows and sewn a quilt for their bed, transforming the rough bachelor cabin into a real home. And on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Yates had joined her family for dinner and they had admitted their feelings in the barn, she gave him a present that made him stare at her in wonder. "We're going to have a baby," she said, watching his face. "In late spring, if Mrs. Chen's calculations are right." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Katelyn, that's incredible. Amazing. I can't believe," he pulled back, suddenly worried. "Are you all right? Is everything okay? Should you be working so hard? Maybe you should stay at the Double J where Mrs. Chen can look after you." "Yates." Katelyn put her hands on his face, making him look at her. "I'm fine. Pregnant women have been working ranches since ranches existed. I'm not made of glass." "I know," but he stopped, clearly overwhelmed. "I'm going to be a father." "Yes, you are, and you're going to be wonderful at it." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, and Katelyn felt tears slide down her cheeks. This was happiness, she thought. This moment, this man, this life they were building together. This was everything. Their son was born in May of 1885, on a warm spring afternoon with the windows open and the smell of wildflowers drifting through the cabin. Thomas and Mrs. Chen were there, along with the midwife from Dillon. But it was Yates who held Katelyn's hand through the long hours of labor, who whispered encouragement and love, who wept openly when the baby finally emerged, red-faced and screaming. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant on Katelyn's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Katelyn looked down at her son, at his tiny fists and scrunched-up face and the shock of dark hair on his head, and felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Yates leaned over them both, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "He's perfect," he said, his voice full of awe. "Katelyn, he's absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Yates Zimmerman, after both his grandfathers, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he was the center of their universe. Yates proved to be a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, marveling over every milestone no matter how small. Katelyn watched them together, her husband and her son, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Yates hired his first ranch hand when Thomas was 2, a young cowboy named Jack who was eager to learn and willing to work hard. The addition of help meant Yates could expand the operation further, and within a few more years, they had built a proper house to replace the cabin, a comfortable 2-story structure with enough room for their growing family. Their daughter was born in 1887, a dark-haired, green-eyed beauty they named Margaret after Katelyn's mother. She was followed 2 years later by another son, Daniel, who had his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn streak. The house was full of noise and laughter and life, exactly what Katelyn had always dreamed of. Through it all, her relationship with Yates only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and tension, but they always worked through them. They talked, they listened, they compromised. And at the end of every day, no matter how hard or how long, they came together, finding comfort and joy in each other's arms. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised her with a trip back to the spot where he had found her collapsed in the snow beside Bess. It was summer now, the landscape transformed, green and lush under the Montana sun. They stood together, his arm around her waist, looking at the meadow where her life had almost ended and instead had truly begun. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been checking my trap lines that day?" Yates asked quietly. "Sometimes," Katelyn admitted. "But not in a morbid way, more like it reminds me how precious this all is, how easily it could have been different, how grateful I am that you were there. I'm the grateful one." He turned her to face him, his gray eyes serious. "You gave me everything, Katelyn. A home, a family, a reason to build something that matters. Before I found you in that storm, I was just existing, just getting by. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Katelyn corrected, rising on her toes to kiss him. "We built this together." They stayed there for a while longer, remembering and celebrating, before riding back to the ranch where their children waited. As they approached, Katelyn saw Thomas and Margaret racing across the yard, playing some complicated game only they understood, while Daniel sat on the porch steps watching them with his serious baby face. The house stood solid and welcoming behind them, smoke curling from the chimney even in summer because Mrs. Chen was likely baking bread. This was her life. This beautiful, messy, abundant life. "Come on," she said to Yates, spurring Bess into a canter. "Let's go home." The children grew, as children do, from babies to toddlers to young people with their own dreams and personalities. Thomas proved to have his grandfather's talent for ranching, spending every possible moment with the cattle and horses, learning everything he could about managing land and livestock. Margaret was more artistic, always drawing or sewing or creating something beautiful from whatever materials she could find. Daniel was the scholar, happiest when he had a book in his hands, talking about going to university someday and becoming a lawyer or a teacher. Katelyn and Yates encouraged all of them, supporting their interests and ambitions even when it meant accepting that their children's dreams might take them far from Montana. The important thing, they agreed, was raising good people who knew they were loved and who understood the value of hard work and integrity. Thomas Jensen, Katelyn's father, lived to see all three of his grandchildren grown, remaining active on the Double J until he was nearly 70. When he finally passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1903, the funeral drew people from all over Montana Territory, testament to the respect and affection so many had held for him. Katelyn grieved deeply, but she was comforted knowing he had lived a full life and had died proud of everything she and Yates had built. True to his wishes, the Double J passed to Katelyn, who combined it with the Zimmerman Ranch to create one of the largest and most successful operations in the territory. Young Thomas took over most of the day-to-day management, freeing Katelyn and Yates to step back and enjoy their later years. They were grandparents by then, Thomas having married a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah and producing 2 children in quick succession. Margaret had surprised everyone by marrying a banker from Helena and moving to the city, though she visited often with her own growing family. Daniel had gone east to university, as he had always planned, and was practicing law in Chicago. But he came home every summer and wrote long, detailed letters the rest of the year. On the 20th anniversary of their marriage, Katelyn and Yates took a trip to Denver, something they had always talked about doing but never quite managed. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate in restaurants, saw shows and shopped and acted like tourists. It was wonderful, but after a week, they were both eager to get back to Montana, to the mountains and the ranch and the life they had built. "We're getting old," Yates said with a laugh as they boarded the train home. "20 years ago, I would have been happy to stay away for a month. Now I can't wait to get back to my own bed." "We're not old," Katelyn protested. "We're just settled, and there's nothing wrong with that." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "No, there's nothing wrong with that at all." They celebrated their 25th anniversary quietly, with just family gathered at the ranch. The children had planned a big party, but Katelyn and Yates had requested something low-key, wanting only to be surrounded by the people they loved most. As they stood together in the house they had built, watching their children and grandchildren laugh and talk and fill the space with life, Katelyn thought back to that frightened young woman collapsing in the snow beside her horse, certain she was going to die. She could never have imagined this. Never could have dreamed that the man who appeared out of that blizzard would become her entire world, that together they would build something so solid and enduring. It seemed impossible, like something out of a fairy tale rather than real life, but it was real. Every wonderful, difficult, beautiful moment of it. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, coming to stand beside her at the window. "That day in the snow, when you found me." Katelyn leaned against him, fitting perfectly into the curve of his arm as she always had. "Do you remember what you said to me? 'You're going to be okay,'" Yates quoted softly. "That's what I whispered when I picked you up. You were right." Katelyn turned to look up at him, at the face she knew better than her own, marked now with lines and gray hair but still achingly dear. "I was going to be okay. We were going to be okay. Better than okay." "The best," Yates agreed, kissing her gently. "The absolute best." They stayed by the window, holding each other as the light outside faded to dusk and the stars began to appear. In the next room, their family continued to celebrate, but for now, this moment was just for them. A moment to remember, to be grateful, to acknowledge just how far they had come from that frozen winter day when fate or chance or the sum of all their choices had brought them together. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as years always do. They lost friends to age and illness. They weathered economic downturns and harsh winters and all the challenges that came with operating a large ranch. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. When Yates turned 60, he finally agreed to step back completely from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, handing over full control to Thomas. It was harder for him than he had expected, this letting go of work that had defined so much of his life. But Katelyn reminded him that they had earned their rest, that they had built something strong enough to continue without them. "We have grandchildren to spoil and trips to take and books to read," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. "We've worked hard all our lives. Now it's time to enjoy what we've built." Yates took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "As long as I'm with you, I don't care what we do." They traveled some, visiting Margaret in Helena and Daniel in Chicago, seeing parts of the country they had only read about. But they always came back to Montana, to the ranch, to the land that had claimed their hearts. This was home. This was where they belonged. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a massive celebration despite their protests. It seemed like half the county turned up, testament to the reputation and goodwill the Zimmerman family had built over the decades. There were speeches and toasts, and a great deal of laughter as old friends shared stories about Yates and Katelyn's early days together. "To think it all started with a blizzard," one old-timer said, raising his glass. "If that storm hadn't blown in when it did, these two might never have met. Strange how life works out. To blizzards," someone else called out, and everyone laughed and drank. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the guests had gone home, Katelyn and Yates sat together on the porch swing they had installed years ago. The night was clear and warm, full of stars, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. 40 years, Katelyn said wonderingly. "It seems like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean." Yates had his arm around her shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, fitting there as perfectly as she had when they were young. "If I had known, that day I found you in the snow, that you were going to become my entire world, I don't know if I would have believed it." "I would have," Katelyn said softly. "Even then, even half frozen and barely conscious, some part of me recognized you. Recognized that you were important, that you were going to matter. You were delirious with cold. Maybe, or maybe I just knew." She turned her head to look at him, at the face she had loved for 4 decades. "Maybe some things are just meant to be." Yates smiled, that slow, warm smile that still had the power to make her heart flutter. "I thought you didn't believe in fate." "I don't. I believe in choices, like you said, and I choose you, Yates Zimmerman. I choose you every single day." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 40 years of love and partnership and unwavering commitment. When they pulled apart, they sat in comfortable silence, holding each other, listening to the sounds of the night. This was their legacy, Katelyn thought. Not just the ranch, not just the children and grandchildren, but this. The simple, profound miracle of 2 people who had found each other in the middle of a blizzard and built a life together. A life full of love and hard work and all the small, ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. "Come on," Yates said eventually, standing and offering her his hand. "Let's go to bed. I'm not as young as I used to be." Katelyn took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. "None of us are, love, but we're doing all right for a couple of old ranchers. More than all right." He wrapped his arm around her waist as they walked into the house, into the warm glow of lamplight and home. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be." And Katelyn, looking around at the home they had built, at the life they had created together from that single moment in the snow, could only agree. The final years of their lives were gentle ones, full of grandchildren's visits and quiet evenings on the porch, and the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived. They celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by a family that now numbered in the dozens. And when Katelyn looked around at all the faces, children, grandchildren, even a few great-grandchildren, she was overwhelmed by gratitude. All of this had come from that moment in the snow. All of this love, this life, this legacy it had started with a blizzard and a cowboy who had lifted her into his arms and promised her she was going to be okay. And she had been. Oh, how she had been. Yates lived to be 78 years old, passing peacefully in the spring of 1931 with Katelyn holding his hand. His last words to her were the same words he had spoken every night for more than 50 years. "I love you." Katelyn grieved him deeply, but she did not despair. They had been blessed with so many years together, so much love and happiness and shared experience. She had no regrets, no wishes that things had been different. They had built something beautiful together, and that beauty would endure long after they were both gone. She lived for 3 more years, staying active on the ranch and with her family until the very end. When she passed in her sleep on a cold December night, it was almost exactly 50 years after that blizzard that had changed her life. The family found it fitting, this full circle, this return to the season when everything had begun. They buried her next to Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains they had both loved so much. The headstone was simple, engraved with their names and dates, and a single line that Thomas had chosen: "You're going to be okay." It was both a promise and a truth, a reminder of how their story had begun and how it had unfolded into something neither of them could have anticipated. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would carry that story forward, would tell it to their own children someday, would remember the blizzard and the cowboy and the woman who had collapsed in the snow and been given a second chance at life. A second chance that she had seized with both hands, building something lasting and true with a man who had appeared out of the storm to save her. It was, everyone agreed, a love story for the ages. The kind of story that reminded people that good things could come from even the darkest moments, that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that sometimes the worst day of your life could turn out to be the beginning of the best. And high on that hill, beneath the Montana sky, Katelyn and Yates Zimmerman rested together, their love story complete, their legacy secure, their promise to each other finally and fully kept. They had been okay. More than okay. They had been everything.